Hello everyone, and welcome to your fourth Apple debugging tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be covering the View Debugger. Now, the View Debugger in Xcode is a wonderful way to take the current visual representation of your running application and inspect the values that it currently contains. And from there, you can even go a step further and take the objects that are currently visible in your view, and you can use the debugger to alter their properties, and then we can refresh the view all within the debugger to reflect the new changes that we made. And this is a great tool, especially if you are in a view that perhaps is hard to navigate to if you were to compile and run your application again, or just if your application takes a long time to go through the whole compile and rerun cycle. Especially if you just want to change small values that might be in there. Maybe it's just a constraint that you want to change slightly, or a font size, or a color. These are all great applications of the View Debugger. The other one is simply just if something is visually off. You can't quite understand, you think you know where all the things in your view should appear, but they just don't happen to appear there. The View Debugger will help you understand what's actually added to the views and what the current size and all that, the other aspects of the view might be. So without further ado, let's dive in. So all of this code, I'll tell you up front, is available on my GitHub page, and I'll leave a link for that in the description. So if you don't want to, try and recreate this kind of application, you don't have to. And the other thing with this is that you don't really have to follow along exactly with what I have here. It might make it easier for you, but feel free to try this out even on your iOS applications. It's not really specific, and all these debugging tutorials are not specific to macOS, just to reiterate that. So the application that you have in front of you here is just a very simple application that I made. So as you can see, it's got a window, it's got a table view here, we've got a bunch of system icons on the left, and then we've got the name of those icons on the right. So nothing super special, but it's good enough to get us through a tutorial on debugging the view. So I'm going to quit this here. Just a quick overview of what's here. We have a table view controller. We implement the data source. We implement the delegate just to give you back the number and the views. There's a table view set up in a nib file here that is owned by the table view controller. The other thing is just a list of all of the system icons that I found on Apple's site, so that's just what's here. And lastly, we are setting the table view controller to the window. So really not a lot of content, but again, if you want to follow along, just check out the code from my GitHub link in the description. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and run this application. And I'm actually going to put the application just kind of in the lower left corner here, because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually stop the application. So to go into the View Debugger, you want to click this little, little rectangle button thing that is the Debug View Hierarchy. And we click that, and now we will see a visual representation of the current snapshot of the application. So what we can do here is you'll notice that I'm going to just move the window up just a bit so we can actually see the window behind us. And the application itself is now in a completely paused state. So in a second here, you'll see that the Beachball will kick in to say that we actually aren't responding to any events anymore. And that's what the Beachball means on macOS, is that the main thread has stopped for a period of time and we're not receiving any more events. So that's what this looks like over here, and that's why I put it in the bottom left corner, because I can't move it once we pause in the debugger like this. All right, so one thing I want to do to just start this out is we can actually continue the application if we want by hitting the continue button, just like we did normally in all of our other applications, and this will allow us to resume execution over on the application. All right, so let's go back into the View Debugger and let's talk about the different aspects that we have. So on the left-hand side here, we have a hierarchy of all the views. So this is the window that we have at the top. Then we have the table view controller. We have a view, we have a scroll view, clip view, table view, and then there's the different cells that are in each one. And so we can see all those on the left side here. And what I can do is I can actually just click on different one of these. So at some point I'll find where I actually am in this view hierarchy. I guess it's not any of those. There we go. So here we can see that if I select different things on the left side, we will come across the items that are, and it will highlight those in the view in the middle. So that's what you're seeing on the left is all the different views that are represented in the application, along with any of the constraints that might be tied to any of those views as well. If you want to search for anything, you can always filter, and this is an extremely useful thing. So if you want to search for any cell views, for example, the side panel here will actually filter for all the instances that reference whatever you type. So a great way to find something if you can't quite find the thing you're looking for. The other thing to note is that all of the windows are on the top level. So if there is a separate window in a Mac application, it'll appear below this window as well. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have for the left side here. In the center, we have a bunch of different things. So if I just click and drag anywhere in this view, I can actually rotate this view that's in the center here. And so I can just click down, drag. The slider on this side will expand or contract essentially the distance between the views. Purely visual, it just helps you to maybe click particular components you're looking at. Then in here, we have the option to see the clipped content. So if I clicked on this guy, you'll actually see that we can now see the other content that's in the table view, but it's off screen. So this will show you any of the clipped content that might be outside of the bounds of the application. So very useful to use if your view is, for whatever reason, maybe not in the right location. Maybe it is actually being clipped, or maybe the content is actually off screen more than you think it is. All right, the other things we have are the constraints debugger. So if I have this on and I click on any particular object, it'll show all the constraints that are between it and other objects in the view. The third option here is to toggle between the wireframes or the content. So there's obviously just a wireframes view, there's just a content view, and the default one will show you both. And then this fourth option will allow you to change the style color. I haven't actually had this work for me, even though the application does switch when I'm running it live. So I assume that this is supposed to change the current content that you see, but it doesn't for me at least. The last little thing here is just to change the orientation, but you can do that just by dragging the view around like this. The last thing on the right side over here is this little range slider where you can actually change how much is behind or how much we cut off from the front. Just helps you maybe dive into a control that's hidden behind some other things. All right, so that's what we have there. Now, lastly, on the right side, we have two main views that we use for the most part. So if I just have any of these guys selected, so I'll just have this text field selected here. There's two main views that we use. We have the object inspector, which gives us all the details about the object, the address of the object, what the object type is, and all the various aspects that come with text fields, controls, etc. On the next tab, we have the size inspector, and this one's very useful for figuring out what the current frame is of any particular object, but also the constraints. And the constraints are especially useful for trying to figure out where different values are relative to where you expect them to be. So as you can see here, we have a leading constraint, we have a centering Y constraint. So you get the idea. Just very useful content for constraints on the right here. Okay, so what do we want to do here? Well, one thing that I'm noticing is that the images on the right, I actually expect them to be larger. And I know that the system icons, at least for the NS user one in this example, is actually much larger than, so that like the intrinsic content size of the image is larger. But for whatever reason, the constraints that I've set up on this have basically constrained it so that it has to be this small. And to figure out why that might be the case, I can select the NS image view on the back here. So we can see along the jump bar at the top that we're currently selected on an NS image view. And I want to see the constraints that are on this NS image view. And there are a lot here. So it's a little easier to probably look just at the wording on the size inspector to figure out what we have. So what we have is we have a constraint that says that the width and the height are supposed to be equivalent to each other, so the aspect ratio will always be the same. Then we have a leading constraint to push it away from this side here. Then we have a centering Y constraint to keep it centered. And then we have a top constraint. And this top constraint is actually going to be the problem for us because the top constraint is going to conflict with the centering Y constraint that we've set up here, along with having the aspect ratio be the same. So basically the aspect ratio being the same means that it's always going to be a square. But because we've defined it to be centering Y and the top to be 22 points away from the top of the subview, this actually means that it's going to try to stay in the center, but the top is going to be pushed down such that the further it gets pushed down, the more it's going to have to become a smaller image because our aspect ratio has to remain the same. So what if I wanted to just change this and see different values that we could have here? So I could do this by actually going into the View Debugger, and with the constraints option selected here to show those, we can actually click on elements in the View Debugger. And if I click on this, I can now inspect different values about it. So we can see that we have an NS layout constraint selected. We can see the address, and we could copy this address now to change values in the debugger if we wanted. But an easier way is actually to just copy. So if we go up to literally edit copy, so Command C, while we have this constraint selected, it will actually do this great thing for us where it will cast the address to the type that it is. Now this is just really useful because now we can immediately go about trying to alter the current state of it. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more room here. And what I want to try to do is I want to change the current value on this constraint. So we can say E dot, and because this is an NS layout constraint, we can change the constant. Currently, it was a value of 22, so the constant is 22. Let's just try and change it to 10 to see if this makes it look better. Now I'll hit that, and if I wanted to see this value, we could just do this. Actually, it's constant, and I could just print out this value again, and we can see that we did in fact change this value to 10. But you'll note that the application is still paused, and it is not going to try and redraw anything in the case that we just change a value in the debugger. So we actually have to force a redraw of our view in the debugger. And the easiest way to do this is to simply say E void and then CA transaction flush. And this will basically flush the core animation context here for us to basically redraw or force a redraw of the content in our application. And so we can see that if we look in the bottom left here now, our image of the user actually was updated, and it's now a much better size, sort of a size that I would expect it to be. So we could keep playing with the constraints if we wanted. So I could just go up a few times and maybe change this to be, maybe let's just try 6 to see if anything changes with that. And we could, again, just run transaction flush, and we see that it does get actually a little bit bigger. So we could keep playing around with these, but I think 6 is a decent constraint to go with for now. And this just gives you the idea of how we could change these values. Now let's try another thing where I actually don't quite like the distance between our user here, so basically the label and the image. And so I could do the same thing where I just select the constraint distance between the image and the constraint here, and we can say E constant, and the current value is 8. Maybe we should just try something a little larger. Maybe we'll go with a 20 here. And again, we could just flush this value as well, and we could see the change in where the text is all live from the debugger. All right, let's do a few other things. Let's change maybe the font size of the label. So I find this size just to be a little small. So we can, again, we'll just click on whatever the object is we want to change, hit copy, and we can say E, this value, and I'm just going to change the, well, let's just do a fun thing here where we'll change the string value. So LDB is calling. And again, we just hit up a few times to flush that, and we can see the change. Let's try something else. So let's delete that. We will change the font. So NS font, let's do system font with size, I think it is. And then let's just try something bigger. So let's go with 20 to see how that works. And that's actually not gonna be happy with that. What's the reason for that? System font with size. Maybe it's of size. That's better. So if we do that, now it works. We can try going up a few times, flush the context, and now we have this whole change in the debugger again. We could keep going with this a little bit if we wanted. We could change even the color. So we do the text color, gets NS color, red color. Obviously, probably don't want that, but just for sake of argument, we could change that as well. All right, so now that we've made all these changes, we can sort of have this easy way of changing values in the debugger that we can then change in our code now that we've tested out different values that we might want to see. The last thing that I want to show you is sort of a convenience around doing some of this. So a very common thing is to do this sort of transaction flush that to update the view, but it's kind of cumbersome to always kind of remember this command and then also to type the command out. And we could make sort of our life easier in this way. So one way we can do this is actually make an alias. So we can say command alias, we call it flush, and then I'm just going to copy the content that we had here. And now if I, so let me just try changing our text color again, maybe back to something more appropriate like a yellow color. And then we can just call flush and we can see that it works. So a command alias is a really great way just to kind of make your life a little bit easier without remembering complex commands. So if there's a more complex command that you type quite often, remember that you can make a command alias out of it. Now, the very last thing that I want to show you is that the problem that we're going to run into is that, so I'll just continue my application here, and I'm going to quit it. Now, if I rerun the application, the problem that I'm going to run into is that the command alias, if I wanted to keep reusing that in the future, is not going to be there anymore. So let me just try, so I'll copy something like this and print it out. If I try to type flush in as a command, you'll actually see that it says flush is not a valid command. And it's because basically the debugger session was created anew right when we recompile. So a way that we can actually save these values off and have them basically come back into whatever LDB instance that we're starting up, right? So if we want to have a command alias that we always use every time that we're in a debugger session, we can actually add this exact command to the basically this file called ldb_init, and when your debugger session is initialized, the contents of this file will also be initialized along with it. So we can just put this in our user folder, so you can just cd tilde, and what we want to do is write out that command that we had before. So I lost the context of it, so I'm going to have to rewrite it out again, but hopefully I type everything correctly. So command alias flush e void ca transaction flush, like that. And so I want to write this string out to a .ldb_init. So what this is going to do is simply take this string that we have right here, and it's going to append it to the ldb_init file. And if you don't have one, it will create one. If you do have one, it will just append this command to it. So run that. And now that I've done that, I can try rerunning our application one more time. And we can go in the view debugger, and let's copy this guy. Let's try to make just a change to make sure that it does the right thing. So let's say font gets, actually let's just do text color gets minus color, blue color, like this. And now we should be able to just call flush and we're good to go. So as we can see, the text changed on that object over there. All right, so that's pretty much all I wanted to show you for the View Debugger in Xcode. It's a very powerful tool and it's extremely useful, especially when you get into a case where you're really not sure what's wrong with the application that you have. Everything sounds right in code, or maybe it looks right in the nib file, but for whatever reason, you run it, it doesn't look right. And this helps you inspect the current view hierarchy, but then you can also do fun things around changing the current contents of the view to see if you really get your views looking the way you want them to look. All right, well, that's all I have for this tutorial. I will see you guys all next week, and please subscribe to the channel for all the new videos that will be posted in the future. See you then.